Welcome back in the Reeperbahn Festival studio. We had a 45 minutes break. I hope everybody could relax and recap a bit on what's being said, how the workshops went for everyone. And we also would like to give the panelists who will be here on stage in a few minutes the ability to get a bit of insights, what we discussed and why we're here. So global perspective on nighttime recovery is such an important topic. We have to discuss how we can make our creative communities all over the world more resilient, but also share experiences, share practices globally. And for this, the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan was created almost a year ago. And the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan is a practical guide that already published 5 chapters, 2 more to come, looking into different areas of nighttime recovery, from how to use outdoor spaces, how to use indoor spaces, how to create a 24-hour city, but also how can we support workers at night, how can we support businesses at night, and in the future upcoming chapters we will look into data and also in nighttime advocacy. So being said, I would like to recover a bit on and look into what's being discussed in the 2 workshops that we had. And Michael and Tara are joining me now from Philadelphia and New York. Great to have you back here on stage. So, first of all, we have a graphic recording. I'm not sure if we have it for both workshops because it's also a lot of work, and maybe we can show the first. Yeah, I've already seen it behind me. The graphic recording of the first workshop is already finished. Maybe we even have a second one upcoming. If not, I already can tell you that we're gonna publish these recordings, but also some of the insights that have been discussed in the workshop on nighttime.org. So Tara, you've seen the graphic recordings. I hope you can, you have it also in front of you on your computer. Maybe you can walk us through what has been discussed, because the panelists who will discuss right after this quick recap session, they have to get some insights that have been discussed. So yeah, would you like to walk us a bit through that infographic in maybe 2 or 3 minutes?
Sure. All right. So definitely the thing that we did start off with is really getting a sense from the workshop or the participants of where people stand. Which areas do you have privilege and how you can leverage this power in favor of marginalized groups? We talked about privilege in different ways. We all, again, not everyone is starting from the same place of privilege, but we all do have privilege and advantages in certain ways, and how we can leverage that to assist others who do not have similar opportunities is something that we really wanted to make sure that people walked away with in understanding. We understand that also with discrimination, that it is not just left to the individual experience, that there are historical, structural, and institutional elements to discrimination that if one individual does not experience, does not mean does not exist as a whole, because there are things that we all are very well aware, especially during this pandemic, and how it's impacted certain groups more than others, that there are other things that are in place. So thinking systemically instead of focusing on the individual really is key in order for us to really move forward and implement like wide scale changes. And then we just also just talked through the challenges inside and outside of nightlife spaces, as far as people being able to access them, as well as people being able to access them to participate and do events, but then also being able to access them as a means for a community institution. So the specific groups may not have access to capital in order to create spaces for themselves within their own communities. So how do we how do we promote or make people aware of these specific groups in certain areas, as well as the need for these groups, doing research, and then also advocating for these groups, thinking of ways that we can use media to amplify their voices, and thinking about, again, your own networks, your own resources, and how you can contribute to the collective work, because it is collective work. It is not something that should be left to the underrepresented groups to solve, because again, they don't have the ability, they don't have the privileges that others do. It's a matter of us collectively doing this work and thinking through our privileges and contributing to the pot that will allow us to promote more diversity and inclusion in these spaces for all groups.
Wonderful. So the group of about 20 or 30 people in your workshop analyzed the situation, especially in the times of pandemic. And as I understood, it was also a global audience. So people from all parts of the world could join, at least if it's not like late at night. So my hope is that we use information that is brought together through the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan, but also through those workshops to really inspire people who have the ability to change things in their environment, to have impact in their sphere of work. And Michael, in your workshop, you went into the discussion of how can we actually use data to amplify creative communities, how to argue better towards decision makers. What was the takeouts of the workshop? I'm not sure if we can show already the graphic recording, but I'm sure you still can wrap it up.
Certainly. We talked a lot about the double-edged sword of technology and what role technology and data play in nightlife. So technology are being used to do ticketing, coronavirus passports, vaccine passports, logins, check-ins, mobility apps, all these other kinds of ways that your data are being collected, which present opportunities to restart nightlife and do things safely, but also present certain threats to people's privacy. And we talked about some scenarios in which that could go well or go badly. And then we also did an exercise with our group, which was from the United States, North America, Europe, and Asia, where we did a small survey to assess things about the health of our nightlife scenes in our respective cities, and talked about different ways that communities can use data that they collect through surveys, data that are found on government websites like open data websites, and through third-party data applications like some of these data collection things we were talking about, and build community coalitions with the different sets of skills needed to take these data and measure the things that only we understand as being important to us as nightlife community members, and turn them into arguments that we can make on behalf of our community and what our needs are, either to politicians or in the dialogues in public opinion.
Great. And what would be a question you would like to ask the panel, or what would be a message that you would give to towards the panel, knowing also that there is a broad a group with different backgrounds going to be on stage in a few minutes? What would be an idea that you would like to bring into the discussion?
I would like to know what folks think are the issues that will keep nightlife on the agenda past this year. There's, for the first time, been a strong economic argument because of what's happened to nightlife because of the coronavirus. But I don't know if that economic argument was very strong before, and I don't know if it'll be very strong after. And I also think that that is not the biggest argument on behalf of nightlife needing to exist. It's more of a spiritual and cultural and artistic argument, and the business-oriented argument is something that emphasizes some potentially the negative things about nightlife, that consumption-oriented lens. So I want to know, what are the things that will keep nightlife alive in the city and keep nightlife on the agenda in the public in the future?
That's a very challenging question, and I'm sure we will have some great thoughts on it. Tara, what would be something that you would like to address from the perspective of marginalized groups, of people of color? You know, there is awareness, but we also have to create change, and we have to create awareness on people who have power, who have privileges. So what would be like for something that you would like to bring into the panel discussion?
Right. There are two things. So the one thing, just thinking through safer cities and wanting to encourage local authorities to mobilize diverse partners and coalition building to promote safer cities. I want to know how that relates to nightlife in terms of like who those authorities would be, because to me, clearly it would not be the police. And so just wanting to get ideas of who else should be engaged in this. And how do you reach out to groups who really feel that they're not safe interacting with authorities? How do you address that? That's also a very big challenge in understanding and trying to promote safer cities. And my second thing would really be on talking about barriers to inclusion, talking about the bias against underrepresented groups. And it infiltrates everything from their ability to patronize certain places and to their ability to access capital to create their own spaces. And how can we work to address this specifically with venue operators already in existence? They already have the knowledge, they have the expertise, they have the ability to implement best practices from how they train their staff to providing guidance to those who are seeking to contribute to nightlife with their own spaces. So how can we engage and encourage that type of work moving forward?
Great. Thank you both. One thing that we would like to announce at this point is that that we would like to use all the knowledge and all the insights that we gained through the more than 120 people that provided information around the globe to the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan to work in the next month on a Global Nighttime Recovery Manifesto. Something that is that leads us, but also decision maker, towards a direction that is important to steer to. Because I think what we the challenge would be for us to stick in the daily struggles that we all have and challenges to survive and to create space and create safer space, but also to create a guideline that helps us to steer in the right direction. And I would like to encourage everybody who's listening today and watching to join this idea of creating a manifesto, to read through the in a few days, the 6 chapters of the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan, discuss it in your sphere of people, in your communities, what needs to be done, what is also some challenges and some fears that you have that we need to address in the future. So everybody who feels interested and feels motivated to be part of that creation of manifesto is invited to join. We set up a blog post on nighttime.org. You can just sign up, and we will invite you to upcoming calls, workshops, discussions to figure out what are the next, let's say, 5, maybe 10 points that we want to look into and address this on every panel, on every discussion, and every discussion we have with decision maker in politics and in the media, that we are not losing track and that we still keep up with those, what Michael said, awareness about nighttime communities, nighttime culture, and nighttime economies. So thank you both. At this point, I also want to thank der Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung and Reeperbahn Festival for giving us a chance to discuss this in this virtual stage. Michael and Tara, thank you and your co-hosts for leading us through that workshop. I know that there was a lot of preparation also going on in the last days and weeks. And also a shout out to the team. Jess, Hendrik, and Alex for putting all this together with Johannes and Büro Döring. So thank you for joining. We now move on to our panel. Thanks for the insights, and let's go on the panel now.
Yeah, good evening and welcome everybody to our panel discussion here at Pop and Politics, a cooperation of the Reeperbahn Festival and the Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung, once in German, and the Federal Agency of Civil Education, once in English. First of all, I'd like to send a warm welcome to all of our viewers at Rolling Stone and the Federal Agency of Civic Education that watch now. You have the possibility to post your questions, whatever questions you have, to any of the participants of this panel all through the show, and we will answer a couple of them in the last 10 minutes of the show, so you can post whatever questions you got. My name is Torsten Groß. Among other things, I've been working on the ongoing campaign Back to Life by Rolling Stone Germany, about the impact of COVID on the event industry. And sitting with me right here in the Hecken Club right next to me is Lutz Leichsenring. Some of you met earlier today, maybe. Hello, Lutz. And Alex Ostermeier, introduce you a little closer later on. Because before I introduce our remote guest, our international top-notch remote guest who will join us later on, I hand over to Thomas Krüger, President of the Federal Agency of Civic Education, who kindly prepared an introductory note for us. Take it away, Mr. Krüger.
Ich darf Sie sehr herzlich im Namen der Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung begrüßen. Sehr spannend für uns, diese Kooperation mit dem Reeperbahn Festival. Und heute wird es eine Diskussion geben, Workshops geben, die sich mit der Frage beschäftigen, wie wir Wege aus dieser Pandemie herausfinden. Die große Herausforderung, das Spannende ist eigentlich, wie interdisziplinär Stadtplaner, Leute aus dem Gesundheitssektor, Leute aus der kreativen Wirtschaft und natürlich die Multiplikatoren der Popkultur selber miteinander diskutieren, wie sichere Räume geschaffen werden können, unter welchen Bedingungen wir in der Post-Corona-Zeit miteinander die Freiheit und die Coolness von Popmusik und Popkultur wieder erleben können, weil das trägt so viel bei zu einer heterogenen, vielfältigen Gesellschaft. Popkultur ist ein Generator für gesellschaftliches Miteinander, für Visionen, für Utopien. Und ich bin froh, dass sich so viele Multiplikatoren zusammengefunden haben und auch darüber diskutieren, wie weltweit eigentlich diese Shutdowns überwunden werden können und man in eine Zeit eintritt, in der man diese Erfahrungen der letzten Wochen und Monate reflektiert, aber das, was wir mit Popkultur und Popmusik verbinden, wieder erlebbar und nachvollziehbar macht.
Yeah, thank you very much, Thomas Krüger. Wonderful welcome video. And back to you, Lutz. Not only you are the co-founder of VibeLab, but also Spokesman and co-founder as well, or executive board member of the Berlin Clubcommission. You've been doing this for quite a while, huh?
I'm the spokesman now for 11 years. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's a voluntary work, and I used to run a club and a restaurant, and if you want to keep in touch with the scene, yeah, it's a great opportunity to be in this advocacy role.
Yeah,
for
we will
quite a while.
speak and show why your work is more important than it ever was, maybe in this special time. Alex. Yeah, you are the managing director of the event tech company Neumann and Müller, located here in Hamburg. But more important for today, maybe, is you are one of the initiators of the Alliance Alarmstufe Rot, who made a lot of sound during the whole COVID pandemic for our industries. And yeah, you did a lot of stuff, and you will tell us later, I guess.
Yes, hopefully. Yeah, in my real life, I'm managing director, but since more than 1 year, I'm more an activist now. Yeah, that also changed my life a lot.
I believe you. And yeah, as I told earlier today, as already mentioned, apart from Alex and Lutz here on the panel, I'm more than happy to welcome a couple of top-notch international remote guests to the panel. First of all, Juma Assiago. Jumi, we are so happy that you're here, finally, that you made it. We've been waiting until, like, I guess 5 minutes ago or something, so good to have you here at least.
What a pity.
You're connected to us from Nairobi, Kenya, is that right?
Yes,
Live.
that's correct.
Yeah, but you sound perfect. Good to have you here. You are the head of the Global Safer Cities program at UN Habitat.
Correct.
And we got Helen Sildna, the founder of Tallinn Music Week. Hello, Helen. And you're speaking live to us from Estonia, is that right? Unfortunately, we can't hear Helen at the moment.
Hello. Yes,
Okay.
sorry, I was muted.
There you are. Perfect.
Classic online thing.
Yeah.
I'm Helen. Thanks for inviting me. I'm joining you from Estonia, Tallinn, and here from my home, essentially.
Yeah,
nice to be here.
Yeah. Nice record collection, by the way. In the back.
Thank you.
And we got Sheena Jardine-Olade from Canada. Hi, Sheena.
Yes, hi.
You work for the Canadian Institute of Planners, and you sound like you were just around the corner.
Yeah, well, that's great. Good to hear. Yeah, I work for the Canadian Institute of Planners, as well as I have a consultancy I co-founded called NightLab.
Perfect. Yes, so good having you. SBC, I mean, 5 international experts for nightlife events and concerts who all have one thing in common, I guess. Even more than before, all of them inevitably became pandemic experts within the past 14 months, which brings us to the topic, Lutz. Earlier today, you did 2 workshops here at the Clubcommission. You've already been talking about it, but I think our international new guests haven't joined those workshops, and I don't know if all of our viewers did. So one of them was about the future of safer and equitable nightlife spaces, the other one, future of nightlife and its freedom. So would you like to give our viewers and our guests a little insight? How was the day?
Yeah, I think it's for everybody. It's a new experience to meet globally, virtually, and everybody is expert in this as well nowadays. But I think it's a good opportunity at this moment of the pandemic, where we are also talking about in many countries already being out of the pandemic or are on the way out of it. In Berlin, we're still in a lockdown, so we can definitely use a lot of knowledge. How other cities and countries have replied to it. And one thing that is a big concern to people in the community is how can we create and keep up with safer spaces? This is something that, of course, not all the actors in the creative communities have the ability to get funded by the government. So a lot of these spaces had to shut down. So we really have to discuss about where are these spaces in the future, and how can we make sure that there are spaces, safer space in the future for marginalized groups, for people of color, for people in countries where the government is not as supportive maybe as they are in Europe. And the second one is, for me, a very, very important topic, because we are here discussing a situation where a nighttime, which was invisible for many years, where people could dive into and shut off their phone and being not recognized and being in a different world, suddenly has been exposed, suddenly has been tracked. Suddenly people tell you when to drink, when you have to go home, curfews, and etc. And I think we as people who are the gatekeepers, who are the people who organize nighttime, but also people that are joining here internationally, should check their privilege and should check what can they do in their sphere to make sure that we are going back to a situation where we are not being so visible at night.
We will definitely jump back to this later on. First of all, I'd like to clarify, because you've mentioned it, we here in Germany are still in a lockdown. We pretty much can't do anything ever since November. And I'd like to ask our remote guests how the situation is in their territories. Juma, is anything possible these days in Nairobi? I mean, do you have any concerts, parties, whatever, or how is it over there? Nothing.
Not at all. Not at all. The lockdown has basically voided off the public space, and I guess this is something which we understand from. You can even see as I speak to you that we have a lot of challenges in our internet systems, communication systems, electricity systems, and time and again we find ourselves in our private spaces, but almost as prisoners of those spaces. So COVID-19 has really brought us to a situation where, particularly in the developing world, where the private space was not seen as a continuum to the public space. And I guess it has given us a kind of a reboot to understand safety as something which brings together the continuum of private and public.
Yeah. And how is it in Canada, Sheena? Are you able to do anything these days, or are you
No, we're in absolute and total lockdown, and it's all dependent on provinces. And where I am in Ontario currently, we are in code gray, which is worse than code red. We aren't allowed to see anyone outside of our family households. We are only allowed to exercise with our family outside in public space. And this is pretty much done until the 20th. They've also restricted interprovincial travel. And yeah, just to reiterate, public space became really important to us at this time. We didn't realize how important it was. But then we also had the problem where there was people within that public space before we decided to use it. So they were being displaced, like people experiencing homelessness. Once people started using public parks once more, people started to think about, like, what are we going to do about these individuals? So we're seeing that where one thing happens, something else ends up pushing and pulling. It's kind of like a wicked problem where you pull up one solution and 3 million other problems end up coming up at the end of it. So.
Perfect. And yeah, let me guess, how is in Estonia? Nothing's possible as well, I guess, pretty much. Helen?
Yes, well, we were actually one of the lucky ones last year in 2020. The festival that I'm in charge of, which is titled Tallinn Music Week, was able to take place last August. Yeah. So we were able to practically try how it is to organize live events at the time of the pandemic. Estonia had the pandemic situation quite well in control last summer, but then the situation changed, the second wave came. So right now we just came out of another quite heavy, kind of a high peak. And just a week ago, museums opened again. And just this morning, we had another conversation with the Ministry of Culture. And we're constantly in dialogue with the Estonian government as well to hopefully in 2 weeks be able to open up seated concerts and theater performances as well. So we were one of the countries in Europe that really stood up for cultural events being open as much as possible. We were able to maintain that situation last year quite well. But of course, at the moment, clubs and live shows and standing audiences are not allowed at all.
Yeah, those happy summer weeks, we had them too, and it feels like they were 10 years ago or something. I mean, there have been a lot of talk about all the problems that the COVID brought into our industries. I mean, especially you and your organization, all of us addressed a lot of those topics. But today we want to look into the future, I guess, because there's a lot of work to do. And I mean, now these days that the various vaccination campaigns in many of our countries are running more or less successful, there's a lot of talk about getting back to normal. I'm yearning to get back to normal, but Lutz, I mean, as for the event industry, is there actually a way back to normal, or are we talking about the new abnormal in some ways? I mean, it might be the beginning of a whole different era where climate crisis, more pandemics may be about to come, and what do you think?
Well, I think we have to ask ourselves if we want to go back to normal. You know, we consider ourselves as a part of the progressive part of society, and I don't think we should ever think to go back to something. We should look into the future, and we should discuss also things that weren't perfect. And we should definitely talk about climate change. We should talk about people of color. We should talk about the idea of rethinking traveling also in a certain way, that for a weekend to party somewhere else in the city and fly back, maybe not something that you should do in these times. So for us, I think we should rethink a lot of what we did, but we also should start conversations. And one of the conversations I want to start is what is actually happening to all these offices that are being built in cities when people are doing home office now? What is happening to retail when people are shopping online now? Are they also going back to stores, or is a lot of that staying online? And what is happening to inner cities? Who is revitalizing them, and what part can culture play in that role? So I think we have a lot of things to discuss. We have to be loud about it. And we should also create numbers and KPIs. So we should measure also what we want to achieve in the future. And I think Juma can also talk about a lot about this. You know, we can learn from sustainability goals, how we can measure them, and we should also create some numbers and KPIs around culture to also measure what we're doing, measure our success.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Alex? I mean, especially as far, I mean, it's pretty much the same game, but there's some slight difference between club culture and the concert and festival worlds. And you've been spoken to loads of people, I guess, about what's coming up next. What are your thoughts about the nearer future?
I think when we look into the nearer future, we should try to, to keep what we have generated in the last year. I think this was the first time we could generate a great awareness, a public awareness, at least in Germany it was like this, for our industry. And this has not been there before. And I think this awareness gives us the opportunity to speak out loud to political decision makers and to create and formulate our demands to them. And when we got into this pandemic last year, I mean, it's now 13 months ago, I was sitting together with some of our competitors when we were talking about the situation, and we found out there's zero awareness and we have no contacts. No contacts to the federal government in Berlin and no contacts to state governments. And we really thought, oh, this will be hard for us. Now, 13 months later, I can say we achieved a lot. And we need to keep this. And I think one of the most important points for our success was that we were able to show the whole industry as one. Because I think it's a huge industry, but it has lots of tiny parts in it. And I think this pandemic gave us the opportunity to show the whole thing. And we did a market study last April. We were really surprised by the results on the study, saying that there is 1 million jobs, 1 million direct jobs in Germany for the whole event industry, including clubs and festivals, but also the corporate side, corporate events, trade fair shows, and so on. And we were really surprised by this high number. And we found out this makes us the 6th biggest industry in Germany. And these numbers really gave us the opportunity to talk out very loud in Berlin and the state governments here.
Yeah, that was definitely a clever move, but because, I mean, there wasn't as much awareness as the aviation industry or the car industry had before, because they had no idea of what we are actually doing. And we've been separating ourselves. I mean, that much self-criticism has to be said, I guess, in a way. Yeah?
My picture is always that we stayed in the we stayed backstage, which is our comfort zone, right? We like to be backstage, but if we want to be seen, we need to get out on stage and get into the spotlight and speak about our needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get back to Juma, our international guest. I mean, what are your thoughts? What do you think? What will maybe stay of all the restrictions that we learned during the pandemic in nightlife?
I think it's the importance of the family unit and really a way of looking at the city that works for all across gender, across age, and across culture. The question of violence against women has become a core dimension of this COVID-19 pandemic. And it's become clear that cities have not really understood the continuums between the private space and public space when addressing safety issues, particularly for women. So with families locked down in their houses, there has been the upsurge of intimate partner violence, whereas we really looked at safety for women just from the perspective of public spaces. So what really changes is our perspective of how we see the city, how we see safety, how we really address safety across both the private and public spaces, and how city policy sees itself then not just from the aspect of increase of police on the street, but more from how people and their mental health is addressed through looking at cities as sites of social interaction and exchange, economic vitality, but also in terms of fields of expression.
I mean, speaking of all the things that you mentioned earlier, Lutz, speaking of awareness, low discriminatory, diverse and sustainable club culture, one could think that the industry is facing enough problems without thinking about such issues. Sheena, why is it the right time and place thinking about the future of event and nightlife in a more holistic way? What do you think?
Well, I think that it was just about time. I mean, from our culture comes like some of the most innovative people, ideas, and things. And I think that, like people have mentioned before, that it's our opportunity to lead. A lot of things were broken, and that's what the pandemic showed us. So what can we do to make these systems actually better? How can we get people to work towards the same sort of goals and to collaborate? How can we manage to access the sort of resources that we need to make sure that these things are actually a reality? So these are all things that we should be thinking about, and we should be looking forward instead of looking back at what it was like before, because I don't think we're ever going to necessarily get that back. And to be honest, I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that there's a lot of brightness on the horizon for us now that we're thinking about things like equity and access, and we're thinking about things like sustainability. These are all things that are, you know, this is like determines our survival. So we have to start thinking about things when we're planning for a return of like club culture.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of which, survival, I mean, that is definitely a word. Helen, what do you think? How many clubs, how many companies, how many people will still be left to build this future in a couple of months? What's your impression?
Yeah, I would love to reflect back on to something that Lutz said earlier on as well, as it was mentioned several times that the situation has revealed some of the gray areas and gaps and vulnerabilities that were existing all the time. Then just an interesting example, I'm looking at my own city, Tallinn, and now that the tourists are gone, it reveals quite a lot of truths about the city space itself. And for example, in the case of Tallinn, we take a lot of pride in our UNESCO protected old town, but actually what has happened is that it's the old town that is struggling the most, because that was the most dependent on tourism. And it's actually these neighborhoods in the city that cater for the local communities that are somehow managing, because they were able to keep their communities closer to themselves. So I think this brings an interesting situation where, first of all, we prove a fact that how connected culture and tourism are at one time. And there's an interesting study being made by World Tourism Organization, which actually says that 40% of tourism in general is motivated, in fact, by culture, be it then festivals or museums or cultural heritage. But at the same time, we also see that what are neighborhoods and spaces in the city if they don't offer value to their own community and their own citizens? And now that we're much more critically looking at what is the offering to the local community, and we talk about inclusivity and we talk about shared safe spaces, I think we're much more closer to this less PR, more truthfully looking in the eye what's happening. And absolutely, there's no denial that there are mega trends that are impossible to ignore. and the green turn being one of them, the digital turn being, of course, another one. And we have to be able to be in dialogue in these situations, but also interesting to see that, of course, it's natural that we collaborate much more and collaborate. I hope that when we look back into this period later on, we see that this was the peak of when lots of new collaborations were kickstarted that didn't exist before, because health and safety is improving all the time for all the live sector in general, and we know we need to include these competencies into our teams in a much more solid way than we ever did before, but also working together with scientists, be it then sociologists or behavioral sciences or neurosciences. We probably have witnessed that we need to learn human behavior in a much better way. And I also loved how it was said before at the reflection of the workshop. I think that maybe this argument about talking about nighttime economy is not the only one, but we really start studying scientifically human behavior and understanding what are the social needs of a human, and then going through the angle of what makes us human and how do we want to interact with each other. I think there's a new way of approaching different behavioral types, different types of people. And we know very well that some of us want to communicate at the nighttime and in different ways and in creative ways. So I think this is going to eventually kind of richen our sort of tools of arguments in the end. I hope we will learn much more about ourselves and our industry as a result of this.
Mm-hmm. I mean, let's speak about the global nighttime recovery plan. Maybe you can give us a little insights on the actual steps that you want to do, that you are working on with your international networks to get all these things hopefully come true pretty soon. And
yeah, when we started this process in May last year, we looked into the different areas of nighttime that were most affected, and we started with open air. So we thought about how can we use open air in a safe way, how can we also encourage governments and people to use public space, but maybe for that we need different laws and regulations, because that is also, getting a license, using it in a safe way is also something that needs to be discussed. And there are so many good practices. Vilnius was one of the first cities last summer that opened up their whole inner city for restaurants to go outdoors and to use public space to cater, which was also a good example for other cities to follow. We also looked into how can we use indoor space differently in times of pandemic. We talked about the vulnerable part of nighttime, the people who are the workers who haven't been looked into in many cases. We have a chapter on nighttime advocacy, on the people who are translating the needs from creative communities to governments, like club commissions or night mayors. So all these topics are so essential. And, speaking of very small things that are similar, when you open up a club, you probably have all over the world problems with your neighbors. So you have to deal with it. You have to make sure that they can sleep at night, that you have a good neighbor relationship. Of course, it's different from country to country when it comes to laws and regulations, but there's always something that we have to address. And now we're speaking about a pandemic that affects the whole world. So we definitely have to use that global connection, those technologies, those knowledges, because there's, as we saw also in the workshops, there's always a yin and a yang. We always have to look how much data do we have to share to make a good argument, but also how much data do we want to share or do we need to share to also make sure that communities are really safe and not being tracked and traced through technology. So I think these discussions are so important, and I would like also I'm interested in the panelists, how they could think about in their own work sphere, in their in infrastructure or connections they have, what can they actually do to make sure that we have safer space in the future and that we have a really reflected way of using technology and data.
Yeah, let's start with Alex. If you got any thoughts about it.
Yes. How to use technology in a safer way? Yeah. I mean, you're mainly talking about collecting data and or tracking people and things. And I, in my opinion, it should always be transparent to everybody. So, if I know that I will be tracked on an event or on a concert or in a club, this might be okay for me. But if I don't know about this, or if I don't know what happens to the data that will be collected on my movements or on my contacts that I make, then that's not a good idea. So I think being open and maximum of transparency there, that's the most important thing. I think from the technological point of view, lots of things are possible. So we can do almost everything. So, but I think we need to talk about what do we want to do with it. That's much more important.
I mean, yeah, we can pass this over to Sheena, maybe. I mean, with especially the strict regulations, contact tracing, social distancing that we will need for a few more months, at least, I guess, and data and technology and all the things you've been talking about. I mean, at the first place, it's a total contradiction to all the things that made nightlife interesting to many people in the first place. You mean expect the unexpected, anonymity, get lost in some ways. And I mean, I don't necessarily want anybody to know that I'm in this club right now, which will definitely happen as soon as we work with such technologies, because I think we have to really make this clever. Sheena, what are your thoughts about the issue?
Yeah, my thoughts on technology, I have to admit, I haven't really thought about the whole privacy area as far as like technology training. I have thought about safety as far as like pandemic planning and thinking about just disaster resiliency. I think that municipalities have a really great opportunity. Cities have a great opportunity to work with private organizations that actually have the trust of the community to teach how to be safer, to teach how to be respectful, to teach, how to move forward in this way in like a safe and respectable manner that we can, sustain our club life. I know that right now, and it's not necessarily related to this, but we do have an organization here called Good Night Out Vancouver, and they'd worked with various municipalities to actually do safe space training within bars, so that the staff would be able to recognize if someone was being harassed or in distress. They also have street teams in Vancouver as well that were there to like mitigate or deflect or bring down any sort of tensions that were happening outside of clubs. So maybe it's looking at something like that. And maybe it's about, I always think about municipalities and cities as generalists that provide resources for organizations who are actually on the ground, who have trust, who've already built those relationships to go ahead and do what they do best in specific spheres. So what we notice the most around here is that a lot of times organizations didn't necessarily, or those bigger government organizations didn't have the trust of people. They didn't have those key stakeholders within the community. And I think right now when they realize that, they're actually doing that and trying to build those relationships, whether it's by buoying up their task force with those voices or actually doing general outreach.
Perfect. We got the first audience question, actually, and that fits very well to something you said earlier, Lutz. I might pass this over to Juma. No name, unfortunately. I can't say who's been asking this question, but the question is, who are the local authorities beside the police that engage with partners to build safer cities? Juma, do you have any thoughts about this?
And a pretty good question, because the narrative of the United Nations has been quite a long time putting a focus on cities and who cities are. Normally, we never look at the institutional authorities of how cities are planned, how cities are managed, and how cities are governed. And particularly when we come to questions of nighttime and the fear of crime, we seem to give a lot of responsibility to those that we know manage crime and could prevent crime. These are the police and the law enforcement. Yet we have other actors, and the local government is one key actor in this discourse. It has mandates that actually build a lot of focus on how we can construct a new narrative of safety that's not about more policing, but just building trust, inclusion, the sense of community, drawing on cities as a celebration of culture, as spaces of creativity. And this really is what the safety narrative today is about, cities that are managing to really build their cities as a 24-hour economy, both by day and night, and where the issue is not about measuring more about crime, but measuring more about those other elements that the city displays from the arts, culture, scenes, and from those aspects of their social capital. I think this is what we really can say brings to light the different other institutional actors, with the citizen being the key actor, the non-state actors working together with the local government in a local governance of safety framework.
I think those concepts are quite similar to what you've been thinking of.
Yeah, I mean, we're working together with Juma exactly on these topics. I mean, it is so important to not respond repressive in creative communities, especially if they just provide themselves a safer space, and then you cannot start to send the troops in to make it safer. That doesn't really work. So we have to find different ways, and illumination is one of the topics that we also discussed in creating 24-hour cities. So illumination, but also community work, advocacy work, just to have more communication in your community is such an important driver for more safety. Yeah. So I think that would be one of my top priorities in next years.
Sounds great. You've already mentioned it earlier, Alex. I mean, 1 year into the pandemic, and it looks like, and we talk about it today, all the tools are on the table, but still nobody's allowed to actually use them. I mean, I can't say too much about the situation in Estonia, Canada, or Kenya, but here in Germany in the past 14 months, when most politicians spoke about the economy, they never spoke about our businesses, pretty much. I mentioned that earlier today. They spoke about the car industry and all those kind of things, even though there were all these concepts for running shows, for running club nights and whatever. I mean, what needs to happen for the government to acknowledge the event industry's cultural significance? Apart from what you've already been doing in the past couple of months, I know.
Yes, but we're still not there, I would say. I think we've done a lot. I think we achieved a lot, but we're still not there. And we think it could be a good idea that if there would be a spokesman in the government for our industry, like the car industry has one, or the tourism industry has one, and that's one of our demands, to say we need somebody who is really there on a regular base. And what we found out is that it took us a long time to teach our political contacts about who we are and what we do and how our industry is working. And there's still things that have not been understood now. So just one example. For us, for our business, we have at least 3 months of planning phase. So it doesn't make sense to start something tomorrow or to tell us, yes, tomorrow we will reopen, because nobody will reopen anything because we need 3 months in advance. So, and what we are really focusing on now is that in Germany, there's no real perspective for a time when a restart will really happen. So none of the top politicians is going out and telling us, okay, in beginning or end of September, the vaccination campaign is at 60-70%, whatever, and that's the point where we're going to restart your industry. And that really is a problem for our I can tell for our company, because the people planning events are not planning them now. They're just waiting.
Yeah.
Very cautious about this, because the uncertainty is so big. And what we realized over the last year is that there was that from the government there was at no time there was they made sure what the next step will be. So it's always very, very short term going on, and the next steps will be in 4 weeks, and then we wait 4 weeks, and then there's little things happening, and that's not working for us. We need
that's a major
we need
problem.
we need a longer perspective. We need a positive perspective, and it must be longer.
Yeah.
And it should start now, I think.
Yeah. I mean, only yesterday, I heard Karl Lauterbach said 3 weeks. I can't remember how many times I heard, in 3 weeks everything will be fine or different again. I mean, you got this. That's what you just mentioned. I mean, maybe because they don't have a clue of how our business actually run, they are not aware of the fact that you just mentioned, that it needs a time to restart. I mean, you got this remarkable list of how nightlife is structured, so many self-employed people and where they come from. And I mean, the fact is, they don't. Most of them work in most of them work for doctors, and they work in vaccination centers or wherever they work. I mean, I think, especially for the club scene as well, it'll take quite a while to get them back, and you won't get them back for a restart that will be shut down again after 2 weeks. So.
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely say that at least half of your success of a venue is the people. And, you can save the contract, but what about the people that they are in a different business now? And so that's going to be definitely a big challenge for many operators, for sure.
You get a very good insight, I guess, on the Berlin club scene, but internationally as well, I guess. What are your thoughts these days? How many clubs will shut down forever? How are they doing these days?
Well, I think the club scene is in the whole event industry probably one of the one which was the best prepared, because we already had for 20 years an advocacy like the Clubcommission. We have a LiveCom organization which is very strong. In 5 years we were in a constant dialogue about gentrification, about a space, about city development. So everybody knew us, they knew our struggles, and then when we started this project United We Stream, we even got in the news on the first day of the pandemic. So everybody was aware of it, and till today I can also say that we saved all the clubs in Berlin, and so that I think we did our homework, we did the right connections, and we were well prepared. But that is something that is very, really tough to say for the whole industry, because it's so diverse and so
especially for solo workers and freelance workers.
Fragmented also.
Didn't get anything, some of them. I mean, how is the situation internationally, Juma? I mean, has there been any government help at all for club scene bookers, whatever, agents, promoters over there?
Not at all. And this is part of the global challenge we see across cities in the developing world, particularly. With this COVID-19 measures, there was very little social, what I call buffers to the lifestyles of those who lost their jobs, particularly from the entertainment industries. And what's going to change, I think, in future is that countries now begin to understand that there is need for the public institutions to provide more social welfare schemes around the citizens just by the right of being a citizen. This is something that in developing countries has not been quite a priority. But I think in the post-pandemic world, we will see a change in government policies addressing the social dimensions of cities and city life. I must say, but when we look at safety also, it's going to be one of the areas where you see a major shift away from just simply license laws and more policing to one that really looks at forward-thinking and holistic views of city nightlife, including more public information campaigns around nighttime safety, and grassroots marketing initiatives. So yes, governments are beginning to move more in this direction, to think about policies beyond just simply policing and law enforcement, to see how citizens actually build their social capital in the recovery stage of cities.
Yeah, thank you. You had something to add, Lutz?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that we did conducted a study in the last month, since January, for a German government organization, the GIC, the GIZ, and we analyzed countries in the global south. We analyzed 3 countries in sub-Sahara, also Kenya, Senegal, and South Africa, but also in the Middle East, Lebanon, Iraq, and Jordan. And it was very, very interesting how we could look into the situation of the fashion, the design, and the music scenes over there, and how also they were pretty much affected in a similar way. And we conducted, I think, 40 hours of focus group interviews and had more than 130 people being interviewed and asked about their situation. So we will publish this study probably in the next 2 weeks, and I'm also happy to share, because I think it creates insights on creative industries that we might also can learn in the global north about. So this is the study is called Voices of Creatives, and comes out soon.
Perfect. We're looking forward to this. And we got another audience question that fits very well to this part of the discussion. And I want to encourage our audience to drop some more questions, because those that we already have are very good and fit very well. I mean, with all these economical problems that result out of the things that we've just been talking about, this question becomes a special aspect. I mean, how do we keep nightlife on the agenda after the corona crisis, apart from economical arguments, which that might be hard for some, I guess.
Maybe that's a question for Helen.
That's a question for Helen.
Aha, okay. Well,
Lutz said it's a question for you. You both know each other,
Yes.
I guess.
Helen is just doing a great job with keeping the community together in her city. I mean, I don't think there is such a good festival that connects so many stakeholders and is so inclusive than the Tallinn Music Week. So I hope.
Thank you so. Thank you so much. But what I wanted to say, you know, how do we keep nightlife on agenda? How do we keep culture on agenda? How do we keep events, live sector in as a whole on the agenda? Something which is maybe easier to do in a smaller country, but something we have definitely felt is that you can't solve a big systematic challenge only on your own. So joining forces, not only in the music sector, but also what really gave results in the case of Estonia here is that we joined forces with all the cultural sectors, the theater, the museums, design, architecture, absolutely everybody. But we also joined forces with the tourism events and trade fairs. So we kind of like really analyzed who has the same type of challenges like us. And this really brought the breakthrough in the public sector understanding of what are the challenges, how can we solve them, and also we really consciously made an effort to show ourselves as professionals and experts. Creatives on one part offering the cultural content, but also really professionals on managing challenging situations, festival sites, complicated productions. I think what we realized quite well was that the public and the government doesn't understand the competence that we already have in the health and safety sector, but also in the production. I mean, if we think about these competencies that are in some of the most challenging festival sites and some of the things that are being built in enormous speed and also very, very calculative when it comes to the concern of health and safety, I think there's a lot of explaining how do we explain the competencies in this sector. But in terms of bringing people together, I am always really for the fact that we need to see as many sectors as possible joining on the agenda. But on making nightlife on the agenda, I think I think it has been a key question to us the whole time when it's difficult to keep the perspective on when you can't actually organize the events. You really need to innovate. How do we keep the communities close to each other? So, so I'm just super proud that I can see that our sector globally, in fact, is part of the dialogue on the mental health, is really strongly part of the dialogue on social inclusion, is really strongly part of the dialogue on environmental questions. So I think we need to present ourselves constantly, not through the lens that we need help, but through the lens of what can we offer to the societies. Mm-hmm. And in this dialogue, we need to build arguments. And this is how we need better statistics. We need to better articulate our professional knowledge and our reach. We need to strengthen also our international networks. And I think in the creative sector, we need to be quite realistic that I think international collaboration has suffered within this year. All of us meet here because there was an organizer who knew us, and we were contacts that had been made prior to the pandemic in that sense. But we need to realize that there has been a gap. Some of the times when people meet in our conventions and festivals where naturally people meet and get connected to each other, this hasn't been happening. So improvised new networks have not been made during this summer, during this year. So I think we really need to nurture the international networks as well, because, I mean, we hear about a study in Spain or a test case in UK where crowds are coming together and research is being made. We bring this research to the table of the Estonian government, and this is the pillar point for our argument to lobby our government. So this kind of sharing best practices and researches and knowledges is so super crucial. And then in every single country, there's a team who knows, this research was done recently. This is a great argument. Let's bring this to the attention of the, I don't know, board of scientists or local health body or municipality or government office. So building this sort of ladder of arguments that we can use as a global network, I think is a very powerful thing. So
thank you very
the
much,
network
Helen. Thank you very much. We're unfortunately running a bit out of time. We're supposed to do a Q&A with our audience in here. So if you got any more questions to any of the participants here, right now would be the time to ask them, because there's not that much time left. Do it right now. I'll get them here on the screen and ask them to whoever you want me to ask them. While we are waiting on audience question, I mean, the question of all questions, I mean, we said there is no back to normal and so on, blah, 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 but how, everyone, if you 1 or 2 sentences, what do you think, how long will it take for the, there is one. They're working on it, so you can, yeah. That's John from, that's a very long question, actually. A lot of the infrastructure issues we're talking about and parts of the solution we have proposed often point to involvement with governmental agencies. What can we do when there is either incompetence, ignorance, or misagreement by at the bureaucratic level? That goes to you, Alex, because we've just been talking about it.
I wouldn't say, at least for Germany, I can say so.
Yeah, of course.
That there's ignorance. I think there was no awareness and there was no understanding of what we do. And we needed to create this first. And I found out that it takes some time. If you see all the successful lobbying of car industry, also, they're doing this for decades. Mm-hmm. We just started last year. So it takes some time to get there. And yeah, I just tend to say, go on. It's just about going on and repeating your arguments again and again. Try to find the right persons on local levels, but also on federal levels. Yeah. And you need to speak out loud and again and again.
Perfect. I address the next question to you, Sheena. How do we bridge the gap between grassroots and decision makers? Are there para-governmental examples out there that can build and leverage power?
How do we bridge that gap? I think that networking is very important. It might seem like there's a lot of people in those in those levels of organization that are not that would want to help us, but there actually is. I mean, I have an example of someone within a municipal government that was actually a DJ and was very willing to help implement stuff like agents of change within a municipality and other things like that. So it's about saying what you're doing, trying to switch the narrative, and just trying to find that right person. Networking is the best way to do that, I think.
Absolutely. One more for you, Juma. How can we fund infrastructure level projects that bring money and cultural capital into our localities that operate outside of civic structures?
Yes, I think that ties very much with the question of how do you link the different sets of communities within a city. We talk about co-creation today, and co-creation builds with it a huge potential of a funding base. It's how you tap into that potential of the different actors and bring them together to co-create the city and the city's nightlife. We no longer rely on the traditional ways of funding from government only. We now look at funding that's really coming from the private sector, from the civil society, even through crowdsourcing from citizens themselves, investing in infrastructure, creating tactical urbanism ventures around street corners, neighborhoods. And this is really, we have, as the United Nations, we have already a critical mass of best practices that really work.
Perfect.
And just next year in Poland, the World Urban Forum takes place with about 15,000 people coming together, where such showcases of innovative funding ventures, innovative legislative ventures will be shown. So yes, we already have a global governance framework that can facilitate this understanding and plug in individuals into that.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Juma. Unfortunately, we're running out of time in here, I guess. There are more audience questions, great audience questions, by the way. But we are at the end of the show already. And first of all, I'd like to thank you very much, Helen, Juma, and Sheena. It's been a pleasure. Perfect connection, by the way. And great to have you here. I wish you all the best for your coming projects and all your plans. And yeah. Have a great night.
Thank you. Take care.
And of course, I'd like to thank both of you, Alex and Lutz. Pleasure talking to you. And I'd like to thank our viewers, and you better stay tuned for our great Saturday night show, Debattenraum Dance Floor, tomorrow on the same channels. You can watch it from 8 p.m. on with show band discussions, films, and musical guests like Mia, Sam Vance-Law, Clan, Silly, and many more to come. Stay tuned for this. I mean, Lutz, at the end of the day, short remark from you. What's your conclusion?
My conclusion is that these kind of conversations are very essential, and I think we are now prepared. We have experiences in how to campaign and how to bring people together. We have now a plan created where we have good practices from all over the world, and now we need to go into action planning. We have to keep this conversation ongoing. And we have to have numbers for it, because we have to measure our success also and have numbers to argue. But at the same time, we have to also be aware that this scene is not about tracing and tracking. It is something where you want to be invisible at night. You want to also be different than during the day. And so my conclusion is, let's keep this conversation ongoing. Let's work on a manifesto together. And I invite everybody to join.
Yeah. What's your conclusion on the day? I mean, you haven't been on the workshop, Sam, but what are your thoughts?
But I think it is very important that we try to preserve the unity.
I'm begging you for a quick answer, by the way.
Yeah. I will try. That we try hard to preserve the unity that we have created over the whole industry, because this unity gives us so much impact on the political decision makers that I think that's the most important point, and that's what we will be fighting for.
It is. Thank you very much, both of you. That was Pop and Politics panel discussion by the Reeperbahn Festival in cooperation with Bundesagentur für Bildung. My name is Torsten Groß. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and hopefully see you soon on one of those dance floors out there. Bye-bye.